It was a cold Friday evening, and the diner was buzzing with activity. I was at my usual booth in the corner, sipping on coffee and observing people come and go. The place was alive with the sounds of plates clinking and soft chatter. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling burgers filled the air. That's when I noticed her, a young waitress named Maria. She was rushing from one table to another, her tired smile never fading despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. I'd seen her work here for months, always polite, always cheerful, even when customers weren't. At one table sat a woman who couldn't be more different from Maria. She was dressed in a designer coat, her nails perfectly manicured, and her jewelry sparkled under the dim diner lights. She had an air of arrogance about her, the kind of person who believed the world owed her something. Maria approached the woman's table with her usual warmth, balancing a tray of food with careful precision. She placed the plate gently on the table, her voice soft and cheerful. "Here you go, ma'am. I hope you enjoy your meal." The woman barely acknowledged her. Without lifting her eyes from her phone, she muttered, "Took you long enough." Her tone was sharp, cutting through the pleasant hum of the diner like nails on a chalkboard. Maria hesitated for just a fraction of a second, her smile faltering, but she quickly recovered. "I'm sorry for the wait, ma'am. Please let me know if you need anything else," she said before stepping away. I watched as Maria moved back to the counter, her movements still brisk but slightly stiffer now, as though the comment had stung more than she wanted to admit. The woman, meanwhile, remained absorbed in her phone, occasionally taking small bites from her plate, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping at the screen in between. A few moments passed before the woman raised her hand, snapping her fingers lightly. Maria rushed back to her side, her ever-present smile still in place. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you?" "I need more napkins," the woman said flatly, not bothering to look up. Maria quickly fetched a stack of napkins and placed them on the table. "Here you go, ma'am," she said. The woman didn't thank her. Instead, she frowned, inspecting her plate like a critic at a five-star restaurant. "Is there any way you can get me more ketchup? This barely covers anything." "Of course, ma'am. I'll be right back," Maria replied, her tone still polite. She hurried back to the counter, grabbed a bottle of ketchup, and brought it to the table within seconds. It didn't end there. Over the next several minutes, the woman found more things to complain about. First, it was the fries being too cold. Then, it was the burger being too messy. Each time, Maria responded with grace, fixing whatever she could and apologizing for what she couldn't. I could see the strain starting to show on her face. Her steps were a little heavier now, and her polite replies carried a hint of weariness. But she never snapped, never let her frustration show outright. It was as though she had mastered the art of swallowing her pride and putting the customer first, no matter how unreasonable they were. By the time the woman finished her meal, she pushed the empty plate to the edge of the table with a dismissive shove, as though it were an afterthought. Maria approached with the check in hand, still wearing her professional smile. "Here's your check, ma'am. Thank you for dining with us," she said, placing it gently on the table. The woman picked it up, frowning as though offended by the very idea of paying. With a dramatic sigh, she pulled out a shiny black credit card and handed it over without so much as a glance. Maria accepted it with her usual calmness, walking over to process the payment. When she returned with the receipt, she placed it neatly on the table and said, "Thank you, ma'am. Have a great evening." The woman waved her off, finally speaking again as she picked up her things. Yeah, she said dismissively, her tone dripping with indifference. Then, as she slid her bag over her shoulder, she paused and added, "Oh, and I don't believe in tipping. You get paid to do your job, don't you? That's enough." For the first time, Maria's mask slipped. It was just a brief moment, a flicker of hurt in her eyes and the slightest downturn of her lips. But just as quickly, she pulled herself together. "I understand, ma'am. Have a nice evening," she said, her voice steady, though the spark in it had dimmed. As the woman walked out the door, I could feel the tension in the diner. A few customers exchanged glances, their expressions mirroring the discomfort I felt. Maria turned back to her tasks, her smile still in place, but noticeably heavier, like a mask she wore to shield herself from the sting of rejection. Watching her, I couldn't help but marvel at her strength. Most people would have snapped under that kind of treatment, but Maria simply carried on, her grace intact, even in the face of blatant disrespect. Maria returned to the woman's table with the receipt, her hands steady even though the earlier interactions must have worn her thin. She placed the receipt gently on the table and smiled. "Thank you for dining with us, ma'am. I hope you have a good night." The woman waved her hand dismissively, still scrolling through her phone. She didn't bother to look up as she mumbled, Yeah, her tone as cold as the winter wind outside. She began gathering her things, a sleek handbag, a fur-lined coat, when she suddenly paused as if struck by a thought. "Oh, and by the way," she said, finally meeting Maria's gaze, "I don't believe in tipping. You get paid to do your job, don't you?" "That's enough." The words hung in the air like a sour note, and the mood in the diner shifted. Maria's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. Her lips quivered as though forming a protest, but she quickly swallowed it down. The brief flicker of pain in her eyes was unmistakable, but she masked it almost instantly with a composed, practiced expression. "I understand, ma'am," Maria said, her voice steady but lacking its earlier warmth. "Have a nice evening." The woman didn't respond. She slung her bag over her shoulder, adjusted her coat, and strode toward the door, her heels clicking against the tiled floor with an air of indifference. The room was heavy with unspoken judgment. A few other customers exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of disapproval and sympathy. One elderly couple whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Maria stood there for a moment, staring at the empty table. Then she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and began clearing away the dishes. Her movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as if to keep herself from dwelling on what had just happened. I couldn't help but feel a pang of anger on her behalf. How could someone treat another person with such disregard? Maria had been nothing but kind, despite everything. She deserved so much better. Maria was in the middle of wiping down the table when the door to the diner swung open again. The bell above it chimed, and everyone's heads turned instinctively. It was the woman, stepping back inside. For a moment, the diner seemed to hold its breath. Was she here to complain about something else? Had she forgotten something? But her expression wasn't angry or annoyed, it was unreadable. Maria looked up, startled but polite as always. "Ma'am, did you forget something?" she asked hesitantly, clutching the cleaning rag in her hand. The woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into her handbag, a sleek designer piece that probably cost more than Maria made in a month. From it, she pulled out a thick wad of cash. The sight of it made a hush fall over the diner. Even the cooks in the back seemed to pause, their clattering utensils suddenly silent. The woman walked back to the table she had just left, placed the cash down carefully, and looked directly at Maria. "I didn't forget anything," she said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "I've been watching how hard you work and, well, I realized I was wrong. You deserve more than just a thank you." Maria froze, her eyes wide as she stared at the money. There was enough there to cover the woman's meal 3 times over, maybe more. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to make sense of what was happening. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say," Maria stammered, her voice trembling. The woman smiled faintly. "Say you'll accept it," she said. "You earned it." For a moment, Maria seemed incapable of speech. Her hands trembled as she reached out, hesitating before picking up the cash. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, trying to maintain her composure. "Thank you, ma'am," Maria said, her voice shaky but full of sincerity. This means so much to me. You didn't have to." The woman interrupted her with a slight shake of her head. "No," she said firmly, her eyes meeting Maria's. "I did. I'm sorry for how I treated you earlier. It wasn't fair. You reminded me tonight that kindness goes a long way, and I need to be better about that." Maria's lips curled into a genuine smile, brighter than any I had seen from her all evening. "We all have our moments, ma'am," she said softly. "Thank you for coming back. It means more than you know." The woman nodded, her face now carrying a hint of vulnerability. She turned and walked toward the door, her steps quieter this time. As she left, I noticed something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Genuine gratitude. Maria stood there for a moment, clutching the cash as though it were more than just money. It was a validation of her worth. a reminder that her hard work and kindness hadn't gone unnoticed. She returned to her duties, but something had changed. Her smile was lighter, brighter, and more natural now, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Sipping the last of my coffee, I couldn't help but reflect on what I had just witnessed. It wasn't just about money or tipping, it was about humility, about recognizing the value in others and the power of a simple act of kindness. Sometimes, the best lessons come from unexpected places. And that night, the woman who walked out of the diner wasn't the same as the one who had walked in. Hey there, storytellers. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story and it brought a little inspiration or emotion to your day, we'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts and feedback mean the world to us. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. It really helps us grow and reach more amazing people like you. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, Storyteller Max and Shelly, so you never miss a new story. We post content filled with drama, emotion, and powerful lessons that we know you'll love. And if this story touched your heart, why not share it with a friend or on social media? It might just brighten someone else's day. Lastly, we'd love to know your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Maria's shoes? Or have you ever experienced a moment of unexpected kindness? Thank you so much for your support. It means everything to us. Together, we're building a community of story lovers who believe in the power of words to inspire and connect. Stay tuned for more incredible stories. Until next time, take care and keep spreading kindness.